So I'm back on now to chair a conversation, which I was very aware when we were organising this event that it was very easy to talk about small businesses where the challenges of culture change are very, very different from large organisations. So I'm really, really happy to welcome Laura McGillivray, who is the Chief Executive of Norwich City Council, an organisation much, much larger than I can get my head round, and very diverse as well, and also Glen Webster from Barclays. And I would love to just start off the conversation by asking you about the challenges that you face in addressing culture, changing culture at the City Council.
So I've been at the City Council now for over 13 years, which is a crazy period of time. And because of that, one of the things that I've always tried to do is challenge myself and my team and my staff about not getting into ruts. And if you're starting off thinking about culture, that you move into this big organisation. So we've got over 500 staff. We've got assets worth £1 billion. We turn over £120 million worth of activity each year. So one of the first things is, what is the culture that you're inheriting? Because you walk into that organisation, and it's quite a scary thing to suddenly be the chief executive unless you've done it before. And you have to start looking and feeling to get a sense of how that organisation works. And my predecessor, and she's long gone now, fortunately, she really wanted to manage everything. So my emails were a nightmare because everyone was asking me all sorts of stupid questions that I didn't know the answers to. So, I was being, people would escalate everything upwards. And I spent the first 2 or 3 years just pushing it all down, going, but you're in charge of street cleaning, or you're in charge of economic development, and you collect the rents, and you look after the tenants. Don't ask me. In fact, if anything, I don't know anything about anything terribly much. My job is to sort of look ahead and see what's coming, and to try and create that climate which will deliver results. So in the last 10 years, that climate has changed enormously. We've had reducing resources every single year for 10 years. Every year now we have to fine 2.6 million to stand still. And I think the organisation has got better and better as the climate's got tougher. So what we've been trying to do is create a climate which is collaborative, which is forward-looking, which is appreciative. We've used appreciative inquiry a lot. And we use that with representatives from lots of our different service areas to think about what would create success in the organisation. What were the ways of behaving that would get us better services and better customer focus and so on. And they came up with our changing pace values. So that's pride, accountability, collaboration and excellence. And we started with pride because people didn't have a lot of confidence in themselves at first. They'd been stuck in little bunkers. They felt they had to have permission for everything. So we started this awards thing called RAWS, remarkable to say, I can forget what it stands for, but it's to do with our lions and it's to do with achievement. And we said we will have these awards once a year and they will reward the behaviours that we want to see in the organisation. Then we celebrated that success. So we've been trying to support positive behaviour and encourage intuition and innovation, but within the parameters of our job, so freedom within boundaries. So if you start to spot a team that's going off and doing their own thing, which isn't on message, you've got to do something about it. But now I've got teams that are popping up winning awards, and I'm thinking, well, that's great. I didn't know anything about that. And I have to stop my instinct, which is thinking, I didn't know anything about that. But actually, that's great. So we have spent a lot of time building that. When people come into the organisation, we welcome them, we introduce them to our changing pace values. The whole of the senior management team meet every single new starter at the induction. And there are lots of other ways, I'm talking too much, there are lots of other ways of trying to support and encourage and nurture that positive behaviour and attitude.
Brilliant.
I said enough for now.
I'll come back. Glen, I'd love to talk to you about culture in a multinational organisation where obviously there are various levels of culture, I should imagine. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you approach culture within your team that has such a role to play within a larger identity.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, it's interesting because Barclays has got 100,000 employees across the world, which is obviously quite a scary figure. So in many ways, it feels like we're a culture within a culture within a culture, etc. But interestingly, you know, the hardest thing, I guess, working for a large organisation is how you accept somebody else's vision, somebody else's values, and they come cascading down. And I think one of the learns I had many years ago was, when people have talked about leadership today, they haven't talked about management, is the difference between leadership and management. Management's quite easy, or you think it is. You just tell people what to do, and maybe some of them do it, and maybe a lot of them don't. Leadership, of course, is, I guess, you know, inspiring people. And actually, first of all, you've got to buy into the vision yourself, and that's not always easy. You know, Barclays has a series of values, and some of them work, some of them are great. There's one particular one called stewardship that I really relate to, because it's about leaving what you look after in a better place than when you began. And because my day job is area business manager, so my team look after SMEs across East Anglia, that you know, in helping them run their businesses, then I guess if we can, in our portfolio of customers, leave them in a better place, if people go on to another role, then that's great. But yeah, the biggest challenge is is buying into, if you like, that vision. And one of the things, it's quite an old thing, but it stuck with me, that I learned a long while ago, and people have probably heard it, the phrase demands, constraints and choices. And it works really well when you work for a large organisation, because of demand, and there's many. You know, I can't suddenly decide, I think I'll go and sell a different product today. No, because Barclays might get a little bit upset about that. Or I'll go and do something different today, completely different. So the demands are, you know, I work for a large corporate company. There are products and services and policies and procedures to follow. The constraints sometimes are short-term things. You know, I've got short-term staff, you know, shortages, or I've got other demands that are coming down from me from places in the business. But the choices are the great bit, because actually, even if I don't agree, in fact, especially if I don't agree with the principles and the visions and everything else, I can choose to go somewhere else. I can choose to leave the company, work somewhere else. And I try to use that with people that work with me, in that actually the exciting thing is, even with the demands and even with the constraint, you can choose how you do it. You can choose how you go about it. And in fact, you have a lot of choice.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So the thing that is interesting to me is, you know, in a small business, we can talk about culture change, and it's something that we can implement quite quickly, because I can put something in place, and a few months later, maybe even a few weeks later, I'll start seeing the benefits from it. And I'm very, very aware that that is not the case for a much larger organisation. And I was wondering if you would share a little bit about some of the resistance to change, or the challenges that you've come across at the council.
So the bigger the organisation, the longer it takes to change. Although, of course, you can change an organisational culture negatively very, very quickly. So, you know, if I was to sort of step in and start bullying everyone and telling them off and, you know, deflating them and publicly humiliating them, as happened in a council I worked for once, you can really bring people down and destroy their confidence, and that destroys their ability to work within the organisation. To introduce a positive culture, which is innovative and problem-solving and collaborative, takes a long time. You have to show people what that means. So what we've done, for example, in our housing and neighbourhood services, we took a number of different teams that worked separately. They would all go out separately into their neighbourhoods, and they'd see different things. Some of them saw tenants, some saw bins, some saw lighting, and we've integrated those teams so that they're now looking at a whole neighbourhood. Having done that in one area, we're now saying, right, let's do that in terms of licensing and enforcement. Let's do that in terms of customer contact and so on. And, you know, generally speaking, once you've got a bit of momentum behind that, I shouldn't use that word, then it is a bit like a snowball going downhill, and you can build that culture. So the more positives you put in, the more you praise, the more you support, the more likely you are to get that. But you will get individuals who are just not fitting that organisation. Some people have been around a very long time and they can't cope. And then, you know, if you are changing the way you're organising those people, you do need to encourage them to think that perhaps they'd be happier somewhere else. Sometimes you get stubborn blocks within an organisation, and there's a particular... We have particular issues around the housing service, because the thing about the council is we have two main accounts. We have the housing rent account, the housing revenue account, and the general fund. And the general fund's everything else. And there was a big tendency in housing to think, well, we're okay, we've got our own account, we don't have to pay ball with anybody else. And it's taken a very long time to sort of split that up and to do that integration and to change the way that we do things. And what you have to do is introduce the new culture and the desired ways of doing things at the same time as you reshape it. And you'll be selecting for the sort of people that you want to integrate. So most of the time we'll try and be happy and fluffy and positive, warm and cuddly, but if somebody's really not playing, then they have to go. And, you know, that's where the sort of the ruthless bit comes in. Because ultimately, one small team or one individual can really sort of poison a part of the organisation. You can't allow that. So the leadership is incredibly important. But also, actually, bad performance can be really damaging. I guess the other thing to say is that because we're a political organisation, we have 39 councillors. Although I'm the boss of the staff, actually I'm responsible to 39 councillors and a council leader and a cabinet. And one of the things I've noticed over time is that in our cabinet meetings, originally officers presented reports, and I would say, thank you very much so-and-so for doing a report. Now we have the cabinet members presenting their own reports from their own areas because they need to own that. They now thank the staff very much for the work that's done. And I think that makes a tremendous difference. So what we're doing is we are mirroring those behaviours. And I think positive behaviour begets positive behaviour. So that's what we do. We're warm, positive and encouraging, but we're ruthless if we think it's going to damage.
Great. Sounds scary.
Sorry.
And great. Glen,
my kids said I was always the scary mum, you know, because they get, you know, it was like 3 strikes and you're out. You're coming for a sleepover, and the first time you're going to sleep, okay, I've warned you now, I'm coming back again. And I'll tell you what, on the 3rd time, you're bloody going to sleep now. And it's a little bit like that, but please don't tell the staff. Are there any staff in the audience? But really, normally it is warm and cuddly and people love coming, and we have lots of UEA graduates coming as well.
Do you know, it's really interesting because I find the crossover between learning about leadership and learning about parenting is just remarkable. But talking about introducing new things into the culture and how you handle that in an organisation like Barclays, are there moments that you've introduced something new that you have faced some of those challenges of cultural shift internally?
Yeah, I think definitely, and particularly when you introduce a new process or a new vision. Being part of the company, you know, we've gone through many changes, obviously, over the years. Particularly, we've gone through ring fencing, that people might be familiar with, in terms of separating the international bank with the UK bank just last year. And off the back of that, we've had our sort of own purpose, if you introduce. And it's interesting, when we first launched it with business banking sort of operating on its own in the UK, we wanted to be sort of number one in the eyes of our customers. And it seemed a great vision, and, you know, there's independent measures out there to do it, and actually we got pretty close. And actually, though, what got really interesting is we then sort of got our own more important say. So we weren't just part of corporate bank or part of retail bank. We're our own entity in our own right. Excuse me. And if Barclays business exists in its own right, we're part of the FTSE 100. But what was really interesting is we then started forming committees of people that worked in the business, a colleague committee, a citizenship committee and everything. And one of the things the colleague committee said, well, we want to be number one for our customers. What about our colleagues? And of course, there's that light bulb moment that actually you've got to be number one for your colleagues first. And now our new sort of business banking purpose, which is very easy to buy into, because it's very simple. You know, number one for our colleagues, which in turn will make us number one for our customers, and will also make our company number one in terms of its growth. Because at the end of the day, we're a business and we're looking to grow. So actually, you know, you get that kind of what and that why, but it's great when people within the company then contribute to it and shape it, and people like our chief exec say, oh yeah, of course, why didn't we think of the people? And now it's easier to sort of relay that back out, particularly when people in your own organisation have had that. And it's easy, because it also needs to be a simple thing to sell to people, isn't it? You can tell them the what, you can tell them the why, and then you can actually talk about, right, how we locally are going to make it happen. And I think that's what really makes a difference for us.
Brilliant. Thank you. We are out of time. Thank you so much for taking part in the conversation and for helping us to make sure that we weren't just focusing on small businesses, but also on larger ships that are slightly harder to turn. So thank you ever so much.